My point being, if you want more comp, but also if you want to change your responsibility profile, either do more stuff with a broader impact or make more money, you probably have to change companies a lot of times. And the reasons for that are not like bad, cynical reasons. They're just like the company just doesn't do the thing that this person would want to do next, or the company just doesn't have the budget or whatever to pay you, 25% more than you're making right now, but another company might. And so you have to go find that company. So again, it's matchmaking, it's market making. So yeah, you can get raises at your current job, even in this environment. You can get promotions and things like that. It's very hard. It's a totally different process than negotiating a new offer. And if you really just want to improve your comp, you probably have to change companies every couple of years.
It's no secret or surprise that today's market is really tough. It's an employer's market. And one of the big questions that Supra community members have is, how do I effectively negotiate in this tough market? So for this topic, we decided to bring an expert who has been doing this for many years.
Yeah, Josh Doody is someone that I know back from my days starting my company in Florida. He was an entrepreneur then, he's an entrepreneur now, and he found his way about 7 or 8 years ago into the world of salary negotiation. Even wrote a book about it called Fearless Salary Negotiation, and has great content on YouTube if you want to look him up before spending time listening to this episode. But I thought we went really deep, covered a bunch of different topics that Marc and I thought would be particularly useful to not just product leaders, but people in tech in general that are exploring different job offers. We covered things like why you should negotiate in the first place. Hint for you is that you can expect at least a 16% in your first year offer if you negotiate. Most people leave that money on the table. We went through the negotiation timeline and the key things people should do at every step of the way, including the biggest mistakes that people make and when they make those mistakes. We talked about why it's not necessary to have a counteroffer in order to maximize the negotiation potential of the offer that you do have on the table, with about 80% of the people that Josh helps not having a counteroffer and not being hurt by it in any way. And then ultimately, we wrapped up by talking a little bit about why, if you're optimizing for earnings potential, why moving between companies every 2 to 3 years is going to be in your better interest versus staying in one company over time. So I think you'll enjoy this episode. Let us know if you have any feedback, but thank you so much for listening. All right. I am excited to introduce our first guest on the podcast today, someone I've known for, I guess, about a decade now, from my days in Florida, starting my company. Josh was starting a company back then too, and has since found his way into being a published author about salary negotiation, lots of YouTube presence, many happy customers. And he's probably the preeminent person I know when it comes to negotiating compensation. And I highly recommend following his content on YouTube if you've never seen his videos before. I send them around all the time. But anyway, without hyping you up too much, Josh, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about how you got into the world of salary negotiation coaching?
Absolutely. Yeah. So first, Marc and Ben, thanks for having me on. Really excited to talk to y'all today and, hopefully add some value to your community and maybe convince some people to negotiate their salary in the future. So yeah, the kind of quick version of how I got into salary negotiation is it's sort of a winding road. So I'll be jumping around a little bit, but I studied at University of Florida in Gainesville. Computer and electrical engineering was my focus undergrad. And then once I graduated there, I went to work for a big Department of Defense firm as an engineer and got bored pretty quickly, basically. I realized that I wanted to do something that was more sort of customer facing and business focused. And so I switched careers to go work for a 30-person software company back in Gainesville as a business analyst and project manager type. And coincidentally, that company was an HR software company. And the software that we were selling and building was for doing performance management reviews and goal setting and succession planning and compensation planning. And so because I was a consultant at that company, I would consult with our clients on how to use our software to manage their compensation within their company. And so that was the first time I kind of had like a peek behind the curtain of how companies pay people. And then over time, I became a hiring manager and for the first time kind of thought maybe I should negotiate my salary. And I did. And then because I had made kind of weird career moves and had learned how to negotiate and was doing other things that were pretty positive for my career, friends and family would start asking me for just advice on, hey, can I ask you about this? I got this job offer. What should I do with it? Or, hey, I'm thinking about these 2 opportunities. What should I think? And eventually I thought, what if I should just write about this? Like I had been writing on the internet for like 20 years. And so I thought, I'm just going to write a book about this. The book went through some twists and turns, but ended up becoming a book that was narrowly focused on salary negotiation. People started reaching out to me and saying, hey, I have your book, but can I just hire you to do this for me? Which I thought was really weird. And so I said, sure, because when somebody says, can I hire you to do a thing that you wrote about, you say, sure. And so then I had kind of a light bulb moment. And through my own sort of inertia overcoming and also friends encouraging me, I started focusing pretty much exclusively on helping people negotiate job offers. And I've been doing that for the past 7 or 8 years. And here I am.
Wonderful. Wow. I learned something about your story there as well. So I love that.
Yeah.
And one question for you before we dive into kind of why people should negotiate. We have a few other questions for you. Who do you ideally like to work with, Josh? Like, who's your typical engagement with? What kind of companies are they meeting? That kind of thing.
So this has evolved over the years, obviously. And I would say that currently I'm working with, I describe them as high earners. So it's pretty much anybody who's making 400,000 or more total comp per year. It just so happens that most of the people that I'm working with are in tech or big tech. Many of them are from technical backgrounds like software engineering, because for the first many years of my business, I was kind of known as the salary negotiation for software engineers person. So that's still a very big part of the group that I work with. But I also am working with physicians and people who aren't in tech, but are in maybe Fortune 100 or Fortune 50 companies in leadership roles.
Very cool. And what I love about your story too is that you get to see the power of creating content and then kind of what unfolds after that. Like, that's super cool. But yeah, maybe like the first question for you is like, why should people negotiate? Like, or in other words, what are you leaving on the table if you don't negotiate when either you're getting a new job or are thinking of changing roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the sort of trivial answer is you should negotiate because there might be room to negotiate, which is a little tautological. But yeah, most companies don't, depending on what role they're hiring you to do, they don't necessarily know what the right comp level is to pay you. And there are a lot of ways that they try to paper over this, including like salary transparency or companies that say, we're going to pay everybody the same in this level. But the bottom line is that each individual has different skills and experience that make them uniquely valued as a person, but also for a particular role in a company. There are so many factors that are in play that even if a company wants to pretend that we pay everybody who's an L4 this much money, it's just not feasible to really do that, because that's foolish, right? They're either overpaying or underpaying a lot of people, maybe all of their people, depending on how they came up with that number. And so because of that, there's a conversation that needs to be had where you and the company collaborate to figure out what is the value of you in this role to the company. Is that value enough to convince you to go work for the company? And is it a value that they can afford to pay you to do the work that they need done? And when the answer becomes yes to all those questions, then you go work for the company. And so the reason to negotiate is that there might be room to negotiate. The reasons under that are myriad that I just kind of described, but it's because it's a market, and markets are very noisy. And it's difficult to find the quote unquote clearing price in economic terms for an individual or a skill set or a group in the market. Negotiating is the best way that I know of to figure out what that clearing price is. In other words, what the salary package needs to look like to match a person to a role in a company.
Makes a lot of sense. And maybe to get more concrete, I know like every role and even different industries look differently here, but on average, when someone negotiates, like what is that type of bump that you see? Is it like 10%? Is it 15%? Getting specific on the numbers, that could also be interesting for the audience.
Yeah, I'm glad that you followed up there, because I realized that the answer that I gave initially was very abstract. Yeah, so I haven't done the math in the past 6 months or so, but I've been doing this for 8 years. I've worked one-on-one with more than 200 people at this point, and the average increase in job offers that they get in year one is 16%. So that's a concrete answer. So the answer, the kind of broader answer, but still useful, is 10 to 20% is what my kind of ideal range is. When somebody says, I have an offer, to use a round number, it's $100,000. My brain says they should be countering between $110,000 and $120,000 unless ... And then there are reasons that I might go higher or lower, but the sweet spot is 10 to 20%. And again, that's basically, it's weird to say this, but it's an arbitrage on the transaction cost of hiring somebody. It's an arbitrage on the lack of information that everybody has when they enter into that conversation. And so based on my experience as a consultant, helping people figure out how to pay people, as a hiring manager, actually hiring people and building teams, 10 to 20% is the sweet spot that I'm looking for. That can be extremely variable. And I will say that an asterisk on it that I have to put nowadays is the skinnier the org chart is at the level that you're negotiating, the more possible room there is to work. In other words, if you're an entry level, I'll say software engineer again, because I've said that a bunch. You're an entry level software engineer. There are, some companies hiring literally tens of thousands of those a year. And so there's not going to be that much room to work because there's so many data points. They can narrow it in pretty close on like, what is the value of a software engineer to our organization? And they're not going to be off by 50% on one particular engineer. It's just not going to happen. Whereas if you move all the way up to the org chart to, senior director of analytics at a big tech company, there are only so many people who can do that job. There are only so many data points for that job. There are only so many opportunities for them to hire someone to do that job. And by not hiring a person to do that job, their firm could be hemorrhaging money. Like they need that person in there 6 months ago and they can't find that person. There are only a dozen people in the world with a PhD that they need to do this work. And so there could be a lot of room to negotiate there because the market clearing price is just so hard to know. You don't know what the value of that person is to the firm. They've got to talk about it. So so the range can be really wide, but for most people in most roles, 10 to 20% is where I'm looking. And the average that I've seen for my clients is 16% first year comp improvements.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah,
that's like basically like 60 to 70K. Just, if you're making $400,000, like that's a big jump that you get every year.
Yes. Yeah. And that compounds, obviously, right? A lot of times bonuses are keyed off of base salary. So I'm not including bonuses in there. So if there's another 25% bonus, add 25% to that. So it can be a lot and it adds up over time for sure.
One follow-up for you, Josh, is I think a lot of this has been so helpful for understanding almost like the uniqueness of the candidate in the role. I'm just curious, like when you think about the companies, like to what degree does the company's maturity, cash position, like how much of how you advise people on how to approach negotiation is based on like the company that they're negotiating with and your ability to like assess to some degree like how healthy, how stable, how much wiggle room the company has?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer is a lot. And so there's a big difference between like a fresh startup that's still in somebody's garage and they've got a desk in there with 3 chairs around it and Google. They're very different. And so a lot of negotiating is understanding the difference in those companies. So I've had so many reps with the big tech companies that I pretty much just kind of know without thinking how to work with them, how much leeway they might have, what the attributes of a person are that might make them particularly appealing or hard to replace, and therefore give them more latitude to be aggressive. And then on the other hand is that kind of small startup world where there's still definitely opportunity to negotiate, but you're looking at different factors that matter. For example, they offer you a bunch of equity. What does that even mean for a company that essentially is brand new and doesn't exist and isn't public? So yeah, a lot of what I do with clients is helping them walk through, yeah, okay, Josh, you wrote a book that has a kind of one size fits all method that is effective, but I can be more effective when I say, tell me about the company, tell me about your background. How well does your background align with the company? What specific insight do you have that might be difficult to replace elsewhere? So a lot of the process of negotiating is determining what those factors are that could be a big impact on the negotiation itself. The smaller the company, the harder it is to negotiate because a lot of times you're getting into the company because of the opportunity to be part of that rocket ship ride to the moon, right? And I think everybody understands that. Like it's rare that I talk to somebody who's going to work for a startup, even with like a really senior level of experience, and they're expecting to make, $500,000 a year in cash right away. Like that's just not how new startups work. But there's an opportunity to get more equity that may or may not have value later. And so those negotiations, those conversations are extremely different than even like a senior person or an executive at Google or Microsoft or something like that, right? Like that conversation is very different because Google and Microsoft are extremely stable. You know what the value of their RSUs is. You know what their budget is in general. You know what the enterprise value of that firm is. And so you can make a lot more eyes wide open decisions with big dollar signs than you can at a small startup. So that's a great question. And a lot of what I do is I'm kind of almost story based, which is weird for me because I'm a very analytical person. But at the end of the day, it's what's the value proposition of this person to this firm, and how can I uncover that to understand what we should ask for and how aggressive we should be based on the size of the firm, the stage of the firm, all that stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, now that it's very clear that why everyone should negotiate. Yeah, I'd love to go over what is the ideal timeline for starting to negotiate. Like when should people start thinking, okay, like maybe I need to bring in someone like Josh, or even just start to think more strategically about negotiating?
So ideally like 2 weeks before. And the reason is That gives us enough time to get to know each other. It gives me time to kind of understand your background and understand what kind of roles you have. And usually when I'm talking to people at that stage, there's an opportunity for me to intervene and help them to do things that are positive and could have a good impact on their negotiation and avoid pitfalls that could cost them money or make the negotiation harder. Earlier, those things can come up earlier too, but 2 weeks is kind of the sweet spot where it's like there is a really good chance that these things are still totally wide open and can be affected by me. Also, I don't like to kind of burden people with salary negotiation stuff when they're trying to get through interviews, right? Interviewing is hard. It's exhausting. And especially nowadays, it seems like the interview process for some of these companies is like, I mean, you're literally doing like a dozen interviews spread out over a couple of weeks. They might want you to come on site and talk to a panel. And so it's literally physically exhausting to do these interviews. And so I don't want people that I'm going to work with to be burdened by salary negotiation stuff as well. They should be laser focused on interviewing, putting their best foot forward, making their case for the value proposition that they bring to the company so that when they do get an offer, it's a good offer. And then my job coming in 2 weeks before is to say, hey, you're about to get offered soon. Let me give you a couple of tips that are pretty lightweight intellectually to kind of handle so that when you get to that offer stage, you can set yourself up to have maximum latitude to negotiate, to be as appealing to them as possible, and to avoid making mistakes that might back you into a corner. Yeah, so I think you should always be thinking, I'm going to negotiate. I like people to be in that mindset. The earlier you think about it, the more easy it is to avoid just mistakes that could be very costly at any point in the process. But up until about 2 weeks out from a job offer, you should be focused on interviewing, matching with that firm. And then about 2 weeks out is when it's time to start putting on that salary negotiation hat and planning for, okay, I think I'm going to get an offer from this company. What am I going to do when I get that offer?
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a perfect transition to talking about some of the biggest pitfalls and mistakes that people make in the negotiation process. And I know you mentioned you like to get involved 2 weeks before someone's expecting their first offer. And I'd just love to share one of the YouTube videos that you've had that I've actually shared with people is kind of about the initial recruiter screen, because sometimes they'll ask you even as early, that could be a month or 2 months before you get an offer, right? But they'll ask you, what are your salary expectations on that initial recruiter screen call? And I love your advice about this. Would you mind sharing with people like how you typically advise responding to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you were asking about pitfalls. This is the biggest one, right? Is essentially inadvertently starting the negotiation or engaging in the negotiation. So yeah, usually nowadays it used to be kind of a two-parter, this question. They would ask you what your current salary is and what your salary expectations are. The current salary piece is going away, I think, due to kind of almost like a viral effect, like the virality of like legislation that's being passed that makes it illegal in some pretty hefty places like California and New York to ask for that information, the current salary information. And so now most of the time companies aren't asking for that. Also, the more sophisticated companies are good enough that they can look at your resume. They know where you were working, what your job title was, and how long you were there. And they can kind of like triangulate on what you were making. Like it's not going to be as good as if you gave them numbers, but they can get close enough. And so mostly now they're asking you something like, hey, it's either at the very beginning of the process, like you just said, Ben, like it could literally be like on your first recruiter screen. If you do come work for us, you seem like you might be a good fit, but like, what are you expecting to make in terms of salary? And it sounds really casual, but the problem is by giving them a number, you're essentially guessing at a bunch of things. So if I reframe that as, hey, I just talked to you for the first time and you're thinking about a job that looks like the job we're offering, why don't you take a wild guess of what we're going to pay somebody like you to do this work for us? And if you think about it deeply, you realize there are so many variables that it's like impossible to know. So for example, how many of these roles are they trying to fill? How long have they been trying to fill them? How many good candidates do they have? What's their budget? How healthy is their company? How much profit are they kicking off? Are they about to undertake any new initiatives? Did they just have layoffs recently? You don't know any of that stuff. And so the answer to that question is, I don't know. I mean, take a wild guess. And the problem is that when you do give them a number, you're either almost certainly going to overguess or underguess. In other words, you're going to undershoot, which is bad because you silently cost yourself a bunch of money. So if they're going to pay you $120,000 and you guess $110,000 and they say, yeah, we'll pay you $110,000, that feels really good. The problem is you don't know that you could have made $120,000. Literally just $10,000 evaporated because you were comfortable at the lower end of their range. And so why would they pay you more? And if they do pay you more, so sometimes you'll say 110 and they'll go, hey, how about 120? And you're like, wow, they must really want me to work here. What you don't know is if you could see the spreadsheet that they probably use to manage comp in the company, the bottom of the pay range for that role is 120. So they're just giving you the absolute minimum because you guessed under the bottom of the pay range, or you overshoot. So you say 160 and they're like, immediately they have to almost disqualify you sometimes, depending on the number of candidates and other factors, because you overshot. And they think, oh, well, I mean, there's no reason to put this person through all these interviews and spend $20,000 on the internal process of interviewing them, because even if we get to the offer stage, they require 20 or 30% more than we're paying. There's no way we can afford that. And so you're better off just not saying anything. And so an answer to that question looks something like, that's a good question. I don't really have a number in mind right now. I'm excited about this opportunity. I think I'm a great fit for the company, and I'm looking forward to talking to different people in the interviews. I want this move to be a big step forward for my career in terms of responsibility and compensation. I look forward to hearing what you suggest when we get to that stage. And so I think nowadays that's almost like, it's like almost like code to the recruiter that I'm not going to tell you. It's a very tactful way of doing it. But most recruiters will kind of be like, all right, I tried. And this person has an answer that tells me that they're probably not going to be tricked into giving me numbers here.
I've been pushed back from recruiters when using that answer because I love it so much. And they still, I give them credit for trying, and they kind of take another stab. And at some point, I'm kind of like, look, if you want to tell me the range that you have in mind for the role, I can tell you if we're like even in the same ballpark, so that neither of us wastes our time. And I've been able to actually opt out of some processes when they answer the question and the range they give is like meaningfully below the range that I'm looking for. So that's one thing that I sometimes tell people that they could experiment with if they're like skeptical that the budget is even there, that there might be overlap in the range.
Yeah. So, boy, by the way, I could talk about this topic for like a couple of hours. So I'm truncating everything. Yeah, Ben, everything you said is spot on. I do think that, it is sort of incumbent upon a candidate to try to align with roles that they're asking they're applying for, or asking to be considered for, that are probably going to align with their comp expectations, right? And so, and I'll just keep talking about software engineers because they're on top of mind. If you're like a staff software engineer level type person and you're talking to like a big tech company for like an entry level L3 software engineer job, you're not going to get paid what you should be getting paid. And so don't waste everyone's time. So that's a really extreme example. But if you're unsure, right? Like if you've tried to vet it and you're not sure what they're going to make, this happens a lot with like a Series C company that's pre-IPO or something like that. And it's like, I mean, they're pretty mature. They've got a couple $100 million in the bank. Maybe they will pay a lot. Maybe they won't. I don't know. And then I think that hopefully you found a role where it's worth kind of risking it and allowing silence to be your guide. But if you're unsure, or if they're pushing you, I do love to ask them to, just tell me what the range is and I'll tell you if we're in the ballpark. And the reason is, a lot of times the recruiter will, if they're getting more desperate and they really want you to give a number, they'll say, oh, we don't want to waste everyone's time here, which is a great opening for you to say, great, I agree. I don't want to waste anybody's time either. Why don't you tell me the range? And then I'll tell you if we're in the ballpark. And then it's like they really don't have any escape because they've already said they want to save time. So you can't say, I want to save everybody's time. You're like, great, give me the range. Like, I can't give you that information. I need you to say numbers. Like, well, now we're literally just wasting time because you know the range, right? So yeah, I like that a lot, Ben. Just telling them. The way I usually say it is, it sounds like you're trying to qualify me for a range. If that's the case, tell me the range and I'll tell you if we're in the ballpark. I'll tell you if we're in the ballpark for a couple of reasons. One is you're not committing to say yes to a number in that range. But two, and this is something that some recruiters are more kind of intentional with and some that just kind of back into it. But, a lot of times they'll tell you a number that isn't like the total comp number. So for example, at a big tech company, if you're like a super senior executive at a big tech company, guess what? Your base salary is going to look a lot like an L6, like a senior person at the company. And the reason is that eventually they stop adding on base salary and start piling on equity and bonuses and stuff. And so if they say 250, that could be anything from like an L4, L5 to like an L8 at Google. And the actual take home is huge. And so if they say
250 can be a component of like a $300K total comp package or a $1.2 million total comp package, right?
Very literally. And that happens all the time. And so if they say, yeah, we're thinking about paying 250, then nobody learned anything there. And you could say that for base salary, that sounds like it's in the ballpark. Let's keep going. Right. And so you're not telling them if it needs to be 700K or a million or 500K. And so that's why I like the ballpark too, is you're not saying if you pay me 250, I'm in, because you probably don't even know what that number means and specifically what it means to them. Right. And so, because they haven't made an offer. So you don't know, is there a bonus component to this? Is that 250 all in? Is that 250 plus equity? You don't know. And so I think if you're like, ballpark sounds good, let's keep going, then hopefully you know enough about the firm that you can just sort of continue talking to them and figure it out later. And again, hopefully you know enough about this opportunity that you're like, yeah, I have a basic idea of where they're going to end up and it's probably going to work for me and we'll just figure it out later. The asterisk on this is like, I've talked to people who literally have a spreadsheet with 50 opportunities that they're tracking. It's only happened a few times. If you're one of those people, and that's like a type of person, I'm not that type of person, but I'm close, right? Like I love spreadsheets and data. And so if you're literally trying to track 50 opportunities, you probably should do a little bit more vetting in terms of comp. And I wouldn't tell them your salary expectations, but figuring out ranges and kind of making sure that, maybe narrow that down to 20 or something. And I wish I were exaggerating. I'm not. Literally, I've talked to people who were talking to 50 companies at once. Then it's probably
I don't know how they do it.
I don't know. I mean, it's a special kind of person who doesn't need to sleep, I think. And they're just super, super high functioning and able to just grind out meticulous stuff. But it's not worth it for them to spend the time of going through 50 end-to-end interview processes to get to the end and figure out what the comp is. So in that case, I would narrow it down. And one way I would narrow it down is based on comp. So that's the asterisk there. Is that's the one time you wouldn't tell them your salary expectations, but you would try to figure out, like, at least make sure that they're going to be able to pay you well enough for you to go work there. And if they're not, then just cross them off the list.
Cool. So I think we just touched one of the common pitfalls, which is to don't reveal your salary. What else? What are other pitfalls or mistakes have you seen that really hinder your ability to negotiate?
So a big one is not negotiating at all. I know that sounds weird, but I will frequently talk to people. You guys have talked to me now for, half an hour or something. It's pretty obvious that I know what I'm talking about. I've been making a living doing this for a long time. So they'll talk to me for half an hour and then they'll go, I'm just going to do this on my own. Or, it's a pretty good offer. I'm just going to take it. And I've already told them, because I'll tell people, like, sometimes I'll talk to somebody, I'll say, listen, I don't know if I can help you. Like, for these reasons, I think this offer might be capped already. I don't think it's worth the ROI is not going to be there for you to pay my fees. I think you should still try to negotiate, but I don't want you to pay me money to do it because I just don't feel good about the return you're going to get on that investment. But most of the time I'll say, hey, look, there's room to negotiate. Here's the approach that I would take. And then they'll say, it's a pretty good offer. I'll just take it. And it's like, I think they're just so afraid of that confrontation is what they perceive it to be. It's not really a confrontation. It's just a conversation that they just won't negotiate, or they feel bullied by the recruiter or something like that. To give stats on this, I've been doing this for a long time. I can think of 2 examples of job offers that I've seen that went away when the person negotiated. In both cases, they were negotiating with essentially a mom and pop firm where the person they were negotiating with was like the HR person, the recruiter, the bookkeeper, and that person just didn't understand how business works. And when the offer went away because of a modest counteroffer, my client said, yeah, there were actually kind of a lot of red flags there. Like they knew. So it's like they knew pretty early in the process, like, I'm not sure this is like a sophisticated firm. And I might not be dealing with like dangerous professionals, but just kind of people they have no idea what they're doing and they're trying to hire somebody to do this kind of work or whatever. But I've never seen a big tech company or even like a medium tech company pull a job offer. And that's with a lot of reps. They just don't do it. The worst they'll do is say, nice try, but no, we're not going to move the offer. That does happen sometimes. But being afraid to negotiate is there's no reason to be afraid to negotiate. If you do it well, there are ways that you could negotiate that certainly blow up an offer. I don't advocate for those, and most people wouldn't do them. So I can't say that 100% certainty that if somebody just goes rogue and does crazy stuff to negotiate, that it's not going to blow up in their face. I mean, it definitely could. But if you're doing it tactfully and just having a business conversation about your value, the offer won't go away. So you should be negotiating. So that's a big one. And it sounds weird to call that out. But some people just are so scared to negotiate that they'll talk to me. And even after talking to me, not only will they not hire me, but they actually won't negotiate. They'll just say yes, which always makes me feel so sad because, man, what if you could have gotten a signing bonus or something?
Josh, is this the origin behind the branding of fearless salary negotiation? Is
100%.
I've been shocked how many people I've spoken with who are scared about an offer getting rescinded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I talked to a lot. I've asked people, have you or anyone you immediately know ever actually seen that happen? And I've yet to see a single person tell me they've seen an offer rescinded for trying to negotiate numbers.
It just doesn't happen. So like a side quest on that really quickly. So think about put on your like I own a business hat, right? You've gone through, especially now, like I was saying, you're a dozen interviews a lot of times. Like a lot of times you pulled for a panel. Like a panel at Amazon is like, I think it's like 4 to 6 people. So that's 4 to 6 people who are probably like managers that should be doing some kind of, value add to the enterprise type work. And instead they're in a conference room interviewing you. So let's say they're in there for half an hour. Okay. So that's like 3 to 4 hours of their time. That alone is worth many, many thousands of dollars and probably like 10,000 plus. Just that one conversation, that one panel.
That's such a good point.
Right. And then you've got the recruiter who's full-time on this thing. You've got they're going to fly you on site a lot of times for this. So that's another few $1,000s with the hotel. So they're, by the time they get to the point where they said, hey, we want you to come work for us, here's an offer. They've spent 10, 20, $30,000 in some cases. They have to do background checks. They spend a lot of money on this. And so it would just be so foolish of them to light $20,000 on fire just because you said, hey, I'd like 10% more. And all they have to do is say no. And instead they say, you know what? We're lighting our 20K on fire. We're not talking to you anymore because you negotiate. That just doesn't happen. It's not rational. And so that's why I was saying, like, usually when that happens, it's an unsophisticated firm who they're just not experienced and they're emotional, or they're not running like a sophisticated firm. They're just trying to hang on and they're stressed out and it's a small firm. So it just doesn't happen. Companies just don't spend the time and money to make offers and then rescind them. Unless, again, so if they offer 100,000, you're like, I want 300K. Okay, well now you're not being reasonable, and I don't know if I want to hire you because you're so far out of line. Or you actually genuinely need 300K, and that's triple my budget. So I have to say, sorry, maybe you need to find a better place. But even then, I would just say, well, you can have the job at 100K if you want, but we're not going to get anywhere near 300. So I'm sorry to break that news to you, but let me know what you want to do. So anyway, it just doesn't happen. I won't call it like an irrational fear. I think it's a very rational fear, because there are a lot of places in life where if you essentially counteroffer, the thing will go away, right? But in the job world, it's a kind of a unique case where it's just extremely unlikely and almost irrational for a company to say we're going to pull the offer.
Yeah, and in my experience at that point, the recruiter is even on your side of the table. Like when I went to Facebook, by the time I got my offer, the recruiter was like in my corner, like dying for me to say yes. And he's like, give me the ammunition. I need to go internally and go to bat for you. It wasn't like I was negotiating against the recruiter. He was like, I want to help you. And I went from like, no, they literally maxed out on the salary range and even the bonus and even the equity. So he was like, there's literally nothing I can do there. And I'm like, well, what about a signing bonus?
Yep.
And he comes back to me that afternoon. He's like, okay, I got you a 20K signing bonus.
Boom.
Like literally like
Yep.
one conversation, you could buy a car with that. Right. So I think, and I'm not even great at negotiating, or at least I wasn't at that point. But like my point is that just so people know the potential of leaning into the fear and just embracing that you're not going to lose the offer. I think there's a lot you're leaving on the table. Go ahead, Marc.
Yeah, and I was curious, this might be a naive question, but if fear is one of the biggest factors, why don't people just hire someone like you to take the call for them and negotiate for them? Is that there's a legal matter there, or why do people not do that more? Because that seems like a helpful service if what they fear the most is that conversation of being, hey, I want more.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think this is interesting to me because I've never actually done this. Like, so you're describing more of like what looks kind of like a sports agent, right? Like they actually are in the room. I haven't done that. I'm not opposed to it, but my intuition is that a company will be more amenable to negotiating with the person than they would be with the person's agent. I think that it would just be harder to get really big changes in comp if the company knew that they were actually, their counterparty was not an employee that they want to convince to join them, but their counterparty was a professional negotiator. And so, but I'll tell you, like when you're working with me, I've done this so many times that I'm doing everything but taking the call for the person. Meaning I write emails, I write scripts. I'll tell them, okay, here's what's, you're going to send the counteroffer. In about 2 hours, you're going to get a phone call. Here's what's going to happen on that phone call. Here's a script for what you can say in the 3 possible outcomes of the phone call. And so that gives them a lot more agency. And I think it also gives them better results when the recruiter perceives that they're negotiating directly against the person that they're trying to convince to join. Like Ben said, the recruiter and you have pretty much aligned incentives. The recruiter has some kind of incentive structure to close X number of placements or to fill spots or whatever it is. You're a person that, like, by definition, they have you at the finish line. They have made you an offer. And they're hoping and praying, they've got their fingers crossed that they say offer and you say yes. You're not going to give them that luxury, but they know that they're close. And also, when I'm giving people scripts, a lot of what I do is I send subtle indicators to the recruiter that this isn't going to go on forever. So I'm not going to ask you for 36 things. I'm going to ask you for one thing. And if you can say yes to that one thing, we're done. That's basically how it works. When they don't say yes, we might ask for something else, and we'll do that 2 or 3 times. But there are multiple moments in the negotiation where I give my client a script, and part of the script is, if you can do this, I'm on board. So in Ben's case, when you ask for a sign-on bonus, hey, listen, I know that you're maxed on equity, you're maxed on base, you can't do anything about the bonus. I was hoping to get to whatever your ask was, right? I was hoping to get to 220K. or whatever. I understand that we can only get to 200K. I wonder if you can include a $20,000 sign-on bonus that'll help me cover that 20K gap for the first year. If you can do that, I'm on board, right? In other words, if you say yes to this, we are done negotiating. It's over. And you're literally standing like if they close you, that's a check for their quota for the quarter or the month or however it works for them. And so you're telling them the answer to your problem right now is a $20,000 sign-on bonus. If you can solve this problem that way, the problem goes away immediately.
Yeah, I like to say I'm at the 1 yard line. Like, let's get this over the line. Like, and with the Facebook guy in particular, I knew I had ammunition because I had just done my on-site with Google, and I said, look, I don't even want to wait until I hear back from Google. Like, Facebook's the company I want to join. So like, if we can just get to a place today, I'll sign. Right.
Yep.
And yeah, anyway, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I think that's actually such a good point, and I wanted to ask about this. One of the easiest way to negotiate is when you have a counteroffer or a couple of offers. Hey, like, can you match this? So I'm curious, how do you use that when you're doing that, or maybe even do you also use the existing company that the person's working at to also do a counteroffer? Like, how does that fit into the negotiating process?
Yeah, so I'll say, I think I have an article on this that I wrote. I'll send you guys a link, but it's basically, do you need competing offers to negotiate? So this is a common thing that people think, and I think for a good reason, that if you don't have counteroffers, you really can't negotiate. So I'll talk to people who will say, I'm expecting an offer soon. I don't want to hire you yet because first I need to go get counteroffers so we have them as ammunition to negotiate. And I'll say, no, that's not necessary. So I don't have exact stats on this, but if I had to guess, my breakdown of clients that I've worked with, and back to the beginning of our conversation, this results in a 16% improvement in first year on average, right? So this works. It's probably 80% of people have a single offer that they're negotiating. And I think that's true for most people. Most people are not the person with a spreadsheet with 50 offers or 50 opportunities. They have one, like maybe they got,
that's surprising,
cold outreach on LinkedIn, right? And it's just a recruiter who's like, hey, I saw your profile. I work at Google in this department or this business unit or whatever. Would you be interested in this role? And they're talking to Google just because they were at a job, they were fine, and Google came a call and they said, sure, we'll talk to you. So they only have the one offer. So that's like 80% of the time. And my clients get great results. Also, my livelihood is based on result fees, meaning I get a portion of the improvement that I help people negotiate in the first year comp. And so it behooves me to do whatever I can to maximize those result fees. I do not go out of my way to get people to go get competing offers to maximize result fees. In other words, I do think that it can be helpful to have competing offers. It is absolutely not necessary to negotiate. The reasons for that go back to kind of what we said before, is that the real leverage in the way that I negotiate is based on your fit for the role of that company. It's value proposition. It's not data. And so I'm sure, Ben, you mentioned this. You didn't say the term data points, but that's what Facebook or Meta likes to say. Just give me some data. I need data points. I need to go back to the team with data points. That's a like almost a uniquely Meta thing. Most other companies don't use that phrase, but they do all the time. And you can give them that, but really the data point is, I'm a unique fit for this role. I understand it, and I'm describing to you exactly how I'm going to add value in this role. Therefore, the number that you offered is good, but not where I would like to be. I would like to be at this other number. Let's talk about that other number. Competing offers can be helpful, though. I'm not saying that they don't add value. I'm saying they're not necessary. And so there are really two ways that they can be helpful. One of them is, which is what Ben described, the implicit threat of you going somewhere else. And so again, we're at the 1 yard line. We're almost done. They've got you right there to close. And just the fact that you can say, hey, I'd like to talk about this offer. By the way, I'm considering a few opportunities right now. So I appreciate you working with me on this so that I can make the best decision for my career. In other words, I have other offers. So I have alternatives and I can avail myself of them, but I would rather not. Here's how you can help me do that. And so something I'll frequently say at the end stages of that kind of situation is, if you can do this, then I'm happy to discontinue my conversation with Google, right? And so you're saying implicitly, we're not talking about the numbers that Google offered. We're just saying Google is an opportunity that exists for me. And if you're, even reasonably sort of comfortable with some sort of statistical analysis, you know that basically it's not a zero probability that that person goes to Google, right? And you want to make it a 0% probability they go to Google. And the way you do that is by saying, yes, we'll give you a 20K sign-on bonus. So that's the implicit threat, just saying I have other options. I would like for this to be my primary option. Here's how you can make that happen, is very powerful. You can also use explicit negotiation. The trick with this is that it seems really good to do this, but if you actually kind of analyze how this would work, it's an edge case basically. So in Ben's case, Maybe the most powerful version of his argument is the one he gave, which is Google might be making me an offer soon. You can help me to not even consider that offer if you give me what I want right now and let me sign. More powerful would be, hey, Google made me an offer. It's better than yours. But the trick is, first, you got to get the offer from Google. You don't know for sure that's going to happen. And it's got to be better than theirs. And you don't know that that's going to happen. And so you have to have a competing offer from a firm that they perceive to be a competitor. If it's a totally different industry, right? Like I got an offer from Procter & Gamble doing product design for them, and I'm at Google, I'll be like, I mean, I don't want you to go there. There's an implicit threat there, but I don't really even care what their numbers are. First of all, P&G is not going to pay you the same as we are.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. And second of all, they're not a direct competitor. Whereas if you're like, I'm talking to you at Meta, I might go to Google. They're like, no. There's only so much really good talent in this area, right? In this geographic region or this industry, we've got to lock this person up. Now we're talking about a direct competitor who could outbid us. And if you can tell them they did outbid you, but Meta is where you want to end up in Ben's example, that can be powerful. So you can say, look, Google offered me $50K more total comp than you're offering me. If you can match or beat them, I'm going to say yes to you. But otherwise, I've got to consider Google. That can be powerful, and they will do it. Google, Meta, a few of the really big tech firms will match significantly higher competing offers. If you can, you don't even have to send them like paperwork, but if you can just tell them what they're up against, they will match. But again, if you think about, there's so many dominoes have to fall for that to work, that it's an outlier. So that's why I don't try to get that kind of leverage, because it's so much work and often will not even pay off. So Google does make the offer. The offer is lower than Meta. And now you have this uncomfortable thing where you say, hey, Meta, I got an offer from Google, so therefore I want you to give me more money. And Meta says, is it better than ours? And you go, well, and you can lie, which I don't ever advocate. Don't bluff, don't lie. So you have to say, it's a better opportunity for XYZ reasons. The comp isn't quite where yours is, but it's a great opportunity. And now they go, okay, well, make a choice,
about the
right?
numbers.
We're already paying you more. Maybe here's another 10K sign up, but they're not going to be like, well, let us just give you a big pile of money because you got a lower offer from Google. So it has to be a superior offer from a competing firm. Like all these things have to line up. And sometimes it does happen. It is useful to have competing offers, but it is absolutely not a requirement to negotiate. You do not never think I can't negotiate this offer because I don't have other offers in hand. Because the truth is you have other leverage that is invisible to you. Like you can say no. So what my phrase is, your yes is valuable because of all we talked about before. Just saying yes is really valuable to them. You don't need to necessarily bring in other leverage. You can use the fact that you exist, you're aligned with the role, they're pretty close on the comp that you want, and that they can get you to say yes by ending. That's really all you need. If you happen to have a superior offer from a competing firm or whatever, that's great, but it's not necessary.
And maybe a quick last question before we wrap up. So it's clear that the market has changed a lot in the last 3 years. I think we're clearly in an employer market. And I talk to a lot of people that are almost afraid to negotiate because they're like, I'm lucky that I got an offer in the first place, given how competitive it's out there. So maybe you can quickly touch on what actually has changed in negotiating in this market and what stays the same. I think that would be super helpful for the audience.
Yeah. So this is very prescient. What you said is kind of true. If you get an offer in this market, you are kind of lucky. It is hard to get offers right now. Probably the most common reason that people aren't hiring me right now when I talk to them. So I'll talk to them and then they'll be thinking about hiring me and then they won't hire me. And if you look at what happened, they didn't get the offer they thought they were going to get. They were talking to me 2 weeks out. I think I'm get an offer in 10 days. And then I didn't get it. Obviously they can't hire me, right? So, but it's hard to get offers. But when people do get offers, I have not seen any difference in the negotiating process. And so it's a weird thing where it almost feels incongruent, but this is the reality that I'm seeing. It's very hard to get offers. When you get an offer, negotiating is just like it's always been. I haven't changed my tactics at all. I haven't seen deleterious effects from that. I'm still collecting result fees on the people that hire me. And so it's a very interesting market. Like you said, it's weird compared to 3 years ago. I mean, it was like, you could walk down the street and trip over an offer from one of these big tech companies. I mean, they were giving them out like candy. Now, in general, the market is, especially kind of in the tech world, is much more closed-fisted. They are not hiring as many people. It's harder to get offers from them. When you do get an offer, negotiate. I haven't seen any difference once the offer is made in the process afterwards. I'll also say what this means is that you probably need to cast a wider net. You didn't ask about job search advice, but use your network. And so, as much as people don't like LinkedIn, see who you're connected with on LinkedIn, reach out to people that you've worked with in the past, who you enjoyed working with and who you think have a mutual feeling about you. Ask them what they're up to. Are they hiring? Do they know anybody that's hiring? Use your network. And the reason is that it's more meaningful now than ever to have a direct connection to this company that you're trying to pursue, or a referral to get into the company, because that will immediately put you to the top of the pile. So it's harder to get offers for sure. When you're searching, cast a wider net. Use your network first. Avoid cold applications and stuff like that if you can. Talk to people you've worked with in the past. Talk to people you know who are managers at other companies now, and work the network. And don't be afraid to pursue 5 to 10 opportunities, knowing that a lot of those are just not going to work out because they have 30 candidates for all of those roles, right? So that's the difference, I think, that's invisible, is how many people are applying for the roles. It's much fewer roles per person now than it used to be. It used to be flipped, where they had way more roles than they had people, and so they just hired everybody. Now it's flipped, where it's like they have fewer roles, more people, so you've got to stand out. The way to do that is through networking, a good value alignment, and that kind of thing. But once you get the offer, you should negotiate. I haven't seen any difference at all once offers come out in terms of what happens next.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. This is less of a question, but just one thing I wanted to talk about for those listening is, one of the things that people ask is, should I negotiate within my current company and try to get a raise or something like that, versus negotiating externally with other companies? Is like, which one is going to accelerate my earnings potential? And in our pre-conversation, just like where it sounds like you've landed is that your business is entirely in the realm of negotiating new offers with new companies, because I think you've probably come to conclude to some degree that there's less room to negotiate within your current role. Can you just maybe say like maybe 30 seconds about that, and then we'll kind of wrap?
Yeah, so I think you summarized it pretty well. Certainly, if you're asking yourself, like, what's the best way to increase my comp over time? It's changing companies every few years. That's been true for kind of forever. There are lots of reasons for that. The way to really level up in your comp and probably in your responsibility level is to move. So I just talked to somebody the other day. This person is, be careful here, they're a machine learning expert in AI who's doing very well. And they're working for a big company whose products we use all the time. And they're kind of bored because they're making really good money, but the responsibility has kind of run out for them and there's nowhere to promote to. They don't want to be a manager yet. So they have to leave. So this is not only my point being, if you want more comp, but also if you want to change your responsibility profile, either do more stuff with a broader impact or make more money, you probably have to change companies a lot of times. And the reasons for that are not like bad, cynical reasons. They're just like, the company just doesn't do the thing that this person would want to do next, or the company just doesn't have the budget or whatever to pay you, 25% more than you're making right now, but another company might. And so you have to go find that company. So again, it's matchmaking, it's market making. So yeah, you can get raises at your current job, even in this environment. You can get promotions and things like that. It's very hard. It's a totally different process than negotiating a new offer. And if you really just want to improve your comp, you probably have to change companies every couple of years. It's just kind of how it works.
Awesome. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I think our listeners are going to find it super valuable. I know I learned a lot in addition to some of the stuff I've already talked to you about before this. This is great. How can our audience potentially be helpful to you, Josh? And how can they learn a little bit more about your work?
You can tell people about me. That's how you can be helpful. The more people that know about me, the better. And I don't mean that just for people to hire me, which is awesome, but also like the more people that know about me and the fact that I say, don't share your salary expectations. Like that's the one message I wish I could just communicate magically to everyone in the world is don't communicate your salary expectations, make them make you an offer. But yeah, tell people about me. You can find me, fearlesssalarynegotiation.com is my website. I'm on the socials, Josh Doody on Twitter, Josh Doody on LinkedIn, easy to find. I also, because of my weird name, I get to dominate Google for my name. So you can just Google me, Josh Doody. Yeah, so reach out, jump on my newsletter. I've got about 25,000 people that I email every week. This next thing I'm doing after we talk is send out the newsletter for this week. And, or, DM me on Twitter, send me a message on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to talk and just be helpful in any way that I can.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.